Hi, hello, my name is Bartosz Wencel, I'm a tour guide, I'm educator, and today, together with Galicia Jewish Museum, I would like to invite you to the virtual tour of the former work and concentration camp in Plaszow. Why virtual? Well, when I'm recording this video, unfortunately we can't go and see what's there. The pandemic situation unfortunately caused such regulations that it's impossible, almost illegal to go and do the proper tour. So the question is whether we can do such a tour while staying at home. Is there anything that will help us to do this kind of tour? Now, the common sense is that the area of the former work and concentration camp in Plaszow, in Krakow, is the place where there is nothing left. Is the place where there are some remnants that are not visible, and those places that are visible that already so altered that it's impossible to trace its origins. Now, of course, when you get there, you will see some monuments, and those are post-war commemorations of the victims of the Holocaust in Krakow, of the Second World War in Krakow. But when you will find yourself in the middle of the former camp, you will see emptiness. Literally emptiness and empty space when there is nothing to see. But is it? Is it true? Is common sense really true that there is nothing left there? Now, this virtual tour will help you to find tools to see that it's not entirely true, that in fact under the layer of earth in the former concentration camp and the work camp, there is a lot of things that remained. Plaszow concentration camp and Plaszow work camp, I deliberately used these two names to describe the same place, in fact was set up in the second part of 1942. And the decision was taken that all Jews that lived and worked in the ghetto at some point will be in a way moved from the ghetto to the newly built camp in Plaszow. Plaszow at that time was on the outskirts of the city. So when the decision was taken, of course, the thing was, from the German point of view, to build some basics, to build some buildings and then to start organizing the whole area. The problem or the issue was that, in fact, the place where Nazis choose to build a camp was the site where there were two Jewish cemeteries. One that belonged to the Jewish community in Krakow, and it was a newly set up cemetery. Newly, I mean, it was created during the interwar period, and the second cemetery belonged to the Jewish community in Podgórze. Krakow has a couple of settlements around that at some point became a part of the city. Kazimierz, for centuries, was an independent city, and only in the 19th century it was joined to Krakow, and from that time we have one city with those two districts. The same thing happened with Podgórze. Podgórze that was created as it was set up as a town in the 19th century, but then it was joined, it was connected with Krakow itself in 20th century, the beginning of 20th century. So, because it was a separate town, it also had a separate Jewish community, and this separate Jewish community had its separate cemetery, and this cemetery was located in Plaszow. So now, when in 1942 Nazis decided to build a camp there, the first groups of Jews that were forced to move there, unfortunately, they had to destroy the cemeteries, they had to demolish all the tombstones, they had to dig out all the bodies that were burned, and like shift these bodies to the mass grave. So it's even hard to imagine the work that had to be done, that those people were forced to do at the beginning of the camp. Krakow ghetto was liquidated, was closed in 1943, in March 1943, and those people who were able to work or were chosen by Nazis as those who were able to work were forced to move from the ghetto to the Plaszow work camp, because at the very beginning Plaszow camp was called as a work camp. Why it is so important? Work camps were dependent on local office in Krakow. So the head of this local office, Julian Scherner, was a close friend to the commandant of the camp, newly organized camp in Plaszow, Amon Ged. And Amon Ged knew perfectly what to do in order to bribe Julian Scherner, and by this to make for himself, for Amon Ged, a space in Plaszow concentration camp that no one would interrupt him. So Amon Ged could do whatever he wanted. That was when the camp in Plaszow was a work camp. But then in 1944 the work camp was turned into concentration camp. It was a sort of legal operation, legal I mean in terms of administration, but it has a lot of consequences, because when the camp started to function as a concentration camp, it automatically started to be dependent and obedient to the office in Berlin, in fact to the Ministry of Economics in Berlin. So Amon Ged in fact lost his powers, as it seems, on Plaszow camp. Of course he still remained a commandant, but for example he had to report to Berlin everything that happened in concentration camp in Plaszow. So that is why I'm using those two names to describe the place. I've mentioned that Krakow ghetto was liquidated in March 1943, and that is the official date when the Plaszow concentration camp started to function. Of course, Plaszow concentration camp was a place where people were forced to work in various places. I mean, some of the people were forced to work in manufacturers and factories that were opened in the area of the concentration work camp and concentration camp in Plaszow. Some of the people were forced in work in nearby quarries. That was quite horrific work to do, and it's again hard to imagine how tough it was to work in such conditions. In many cases, when people used to work in those quarries, they didn't have enough tools. Of course, we have to imagine that the diet in the camp was not sufficient to fill all the needs of the workers. So, as I said, this work in quarry was hard to imagine. Also, people used to work outside the camp. Some of the factories were not moved to the camp, still function outside the camp. So every day, usually early morning, there were columns moving from the camp to the factory, and then late in the night those columns were marching back to the camp. So the camp never became, in a way, a death camp. I mean, by this, Nazis never built gas chambers and never built crematorium. So we can't use this term to describe this place. But of course it doesn't mean that the place wasn't a place where there was no mass murders. We can't say that in Plaszow concentration camp there was no mass murders. We can't say that in Plaszow concentration and work camp there was no war crimes that we know from the other places. There were. In fact, in total, it is said that in Plaszow camp lived 20,000 people, and the total number of victims is estimated to be like 8 to 9,000 people. Those people are still buried in 3 mass graves that still there, that still exists in this place. And during this virtual tour, I will show you where those places are. I will show you that with the simple tools that you can use on your laptop, you can use on your computer, you can use even on your smartphone. You can see what's left there. You can see traces of the history of this horrific history that happened 80, 70 years ago in Krakow. So the first tool that I would like to show you is the most common one probably. So that's the Google Maps, the tool that we use almost every day to get from one place to another or to find some other places that might interest us. So what we can see on the Google Map, of course, what you see now is Krakow. The Google Maps is based on aerial photos and also satellite pictures. So here you have the modern view of Krakow, and as I said, the Plaszow concentration camp, work camp and concentration camp was situated on the outskirts and during the Second World War in southern part of Krakow. So now you already see a couple of places that are visible or somehow signed, like the old synagogue, Stara Synagoga, the Oskar Schindler factory, which is very important in the history of Second World War and history of Jews during Second World War. But let's zoom the place that is the most interesting for us today. So the Plaszow concentration camp, basically today is the green area. So the big um, green area in the southern part here, of course, will be the place that I'm talking about today. And when we are zooming, of course, I'm recording from Poland, so the sign here is in Polish, and it says the former German concentration camp Plaszow. Probably your versions of Google Maps will translate this name into your language, and it will be the former concentration camp, former labor camp, or whatever the name is translated into your language. So we have the area. Uh, Now the question is if from this perspective we can say something more about the place. If let's say that we are looking at this place for the first time, we don't know that in Krakow there was a concentration camp, and the question is if we can say that it was such a place basing on what we see now. On one hand, we can't, of course, without knowledge that I said about, we can't say that it was a concentration camp or a labor camp, but if we zoom a little bit more, we'll see quite distinctive features. Like, for example, this square thing right in the middle of this green area. This square thing, we know that was a place where the roll call square was, or the Appelplatz, which was right in the center of the former camp. It was the place where every day the day had started and the day had finished with, for example, counting all the prisoners from all blocks, all barracks. And for example, if someone was missing or there was some problem with counting those prisoners, usually in Plaszow concentration camps, those prisoners had to stay there as long as the situation was cleared by Germans. Sometimes when the situation happened, it took 30 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, sometimes 2 hours, sometimes 5 hours. It really depends. Probably the longest roll call square took about 15 hours when there were a couple of prisoners missing because they escaped, and those people had to stay there outside. Of course, they couldn't sit, they couldn't walk away, they couldn't drink anything. They had to stay as long as Nazis would find what happened with those missing prisoners, with those missing people sometimes. And this was thanks to, in a way, of course, thanks to Amon God. The Apple Plus was the place where the Amon God, commandant of the camp, would show his brutality, his sadistic behavior by, for example, organizing sort of performances, if we can say, if we can use such term to describe what he did, when, for example, he had to, or he wanted to punish some of the prisoners that committed some crimes according to him. And he, for example, was involved in hanging those people, or as prisoners say, those who survived Second World War, on one day, though he decided to punish, to kill prisoners that escaped and eventually were caught by Nazis, escaped from the camp, and those people were tied up to the horses and dragged by Amon God all around the roll call square. So yes, this sort of square feature was a roll call square, but it wasn't so visible till a couple of years ago when the Jewish community from Krakow decided to somehow mark this place, somehow underline this place by shifting and here a lot of stones, a lot of little pebbles, which were left there. And thanks to this, we now see where the roll call square was. Now, if we zoom a little bit more, we see much clearer the roll call square, and now there are a couple of things more that drags our attention. For example, we see those linear features that are coming from the roll call square. They are quite distinctive. They run in sort of the same distances, and they are pretty much the same sizes. So the landscape archaeologists could say that probably these linear features are man-made, and we know that they are man-made. They are visible thanks to the dry period, and they are coming up from the ground, and they are marking, in fact, the place where some of the barracks used to be. We know from the plans, from the maps of the camps, that those barracks at the very beginning in 1943 were the barracks where Poles lived, because the labor camp, work camp in Plaszow, and later concentration camp was also a place where Poles were dragged. Of course, not in such numbers as Jews, but they were. They were brought there, they were imprisoned there when they committed some crimes, when they were suspected to be somehow involved in resistance. In such case, they were firstly moved to the prison in Krakow on Montelupi Street, and then later they were moved to the camp. Usually, Poles were released after a couple of months sitting in the camp. They were released to the freedom. Of course, Jews didn't have such an option. There was no way that Jews would be released and left outside the camp. So that's the biggest difference. And the question is, of course, whether Poles were killed in the Plaszow camp, and the answer is Yes, they were. And they were also executions of Poles who lived in the camp, or they were executions of Poles that even were sort of moved to the camp directly to the execution place and killed there. So those linear features, those things that are barely visible, but they are visible, they are marking such places. If we move a little bit to the south of the camp, we are seeing a gray features that are distinctive, and they are very different from the other green areas or this dry grass that I've shown you before. So these gray areas are also marking quite distinctive places because those are ponds that were built by prisoners in 1943. And about these ponds, I will tell you more a little bit later. So, yes, the Google Maps, as you see, are the very basic tool that can help us to see that there are some features, there are some places, some things that we can see. The Google Maps. In its basic form, is the tool that can be somehow filled and created by users. So users can add some descriptions to the map. And here you can see such descriptions, like for example, Szary Dom. Probably in your language, in your version of the Google Maps, it will be described as a gray house. The gray house is in fact pre-war building, and it belonged to Hevra Kadisha, so the burial society, because as I said before, the area where the camp was built was the area where before Second World War two Jewish cemeteries existed. And also on these pictures on the Google Maps, you have at least one of them quite distinctively shown, and it's the old Jewish cemetery that belonged to the Jewish community in Podgórze, and it is also described. Here, on the other hand, in the south corner of the camp, you have another thing that doesn't fit to the general layout of the building. It's octagonal shape, and in fact, it's the pre-First World War feature because Krakow, as the city which was situated quite close to the Russian border, became a place when Austrians who ruled this town and who ruled this area for more than the century, 19th century, decided to build a lot of forts and fortresses around the city and in the city. So this octagonal shape, if in fact is the shape of one of the fortresses that existed in Krakow in the end of 19th, the beginning of 20th century, but during Second World War, after Nazis built the camp, it became one of the places where I mean Nazis killed prisoners. It's also a place where it's one of the mass graves in the area of the camp. The other place is not so visible. It's described in the Google Maps, but it's not visible. And it's on my version described as a H Gorka. So in English, it will be the H hill. Like the first one that I've shown you is quite often described as a C hill. Why C hill and why H hill? I will tell you later. Before I will show you the next tool, or in fact that will be the extended Google Maps tool, I need to say something more and give you a broader picture on how the Plaszow, the former camp, the area of the former Plaszow and concentration camp functioned after Second World War. Because after Second World War, quite quickly, those places that remained, those buildings or remnants of the buildings that remained were dismantled, mostly by locals, by people from Krakow. So from 50s, in fact, all the remnants of the barracks, all or things that stick out of the ground, were taken, and in fact, there was nothing visible. But on the maps, and by this we can say that in common sense, the area somehow functioned as the cemetery. At least it was always marked as a cemetery on the maps, always till 1970s. For some reason, from 1970s, the place started to be marked as a green area. And what is more disturbing, it was started to be used by locals as a green area. Green area, by using this term, I mean a place where people go for a walk with the dog, as a recreation area, using one word. And quite quickly, it was forgotten as a place where mass murders happened, when the genocide happened, when the Shoah, Holocaust happened. So, uh, of course, there were monuments from 1960s, and then more modern monuments commemorating, but they were in one specific place. The other place, the whole area, was, as I said, used as something completely different. And now, a couple of years ago, some disturbing things started to happen. For one of the companies that is responsible for providing gas uh, started to dig some ditches in the area without any consulting with anybody, with the Jewish community or some other institution, and quite surprisingly, or with our knowledge, quite unsurprisingly, they started to find human remains. They started to find human bones. There are also letters or some people who started to say that then when they are walking with their dogs, their dogs started to bring also some human remains. From our point of view, it's not surprising at all, because we know that the area was used as was a concentration camp. In fact, this is the area where three mass graves still exist. This is the area where about 8,000 people are buried. So with this knowledge, it's not surprising at all. But it started a big discussion what to do with this area. Who is responsible for this area? Fortunately, the city of Krakow started to take some steps, some basic steps, but necessary steps to mark the place, to somehow educate people who use this area as I said before, as a recreation area. What they started to do was to put a simple board saying what was in this place, what was in that place, what was in places that I said or described before. Moreover, they also set a branch of the History Museum of Krakow, or the Museum of Krakow, because now that's the proper name of this institution, a branch that would be in the future probably a proper museum. At least this is the plan. The branch is functioning, at least it is functioning online. They are also organizing some lectures. This was also an institution responsible for basic archaeological researches, about which I will tell you also in a minute. And what they are running, what they are doing, is mostly educating by already mentioned words, but also educating online. And now, if we'll move to their website on Facebook, you will see a lot of posts about the history, a lot of pictures, also historical pictures, pictures of the place, from Second World War, also modern pictures. But we are focusing today on tools that will help us to see what's there. So if we'll click learn more, and of course the place is called Miejsce Pamięci, which is a memorial site, KL Plaszow. KL stands of course for Concentration Lager Plaszow. So if you type into a browser here in Facebook browser, I am pretty sure that will be the first result. But let's click learn more button, and what happened is that the institution decided to put on the Google map another layer of the things, buildings and maps and plans. So by this we can see where each buildings used to be. I mentioned before about this lineage that runs from the square, the roll call square. So now you have the plan of the camp that is imposed on the aerial photo, and you see that in fact it was a place where barracks used to be. This aerial photo, this plan that is put on the aerial photo is the plan from 1944. It's not the only plan of the Plaszow concentration camp and Plaszow work camp. There are at least three plans, and they are showing three completely different stages of the camp development. I mean, there is no plan that would show you how the camp was, because it was changed and altered all the time. So, for example, in 1944, there are plans that are showing, of course, things and buildings that already existed, but also those kind of plans show places that Nazis planned to build and they never managed to build. So you have to bear in mind that with those kind of pictures, those kind of plans, there is always a possibility that this building didn't exist, or it existed before the plan was drawn, was somehow created. This tool is also good because the Museum of Krakow decided to put a short description, as you see also in English, that will help you to identify at least some of the places. And as I said before, here you have the roll call areas and the industrial areas near the roll call square. I've mentioned before Grey House, and Grey House is also described here in the description area. You have the H Gorka, or the H hill, that I've mentioned before. You have a lot of things in southern part described as well. It's very useful if you like to learn more about the history of the camp. So I strongly recommend to follow the Facebook page of the memorial site of Kiel Plaszow. So you already know that on Google Maps there is a couple of tools that you can use to see what's left after the labor camp, after work camp and concentration camp in Krakow. But the question is there something more? Are there any tools that would show more precisely how the area looks today? There are. And this one is much better in terms of resolution, in terms of showing details of what's left in the area of the Plaszow concentration camp. It's the geoportal. It's the state portal for cartographics, for geologists, for uh, cadastral maps, these kind of things. Of course, the portal and the whole tool is focused on today's life and modern life, but we can use it to learn more about history of many places. Now, what is the tool precisely? The tool is orthophoto map or orthophoto. That's the map that is based on aerial pictures. So it gives us, but it's focused on specific areas, and thanks to this, it gives us much better picture. The website you can see here, it's mapy.geoportal.gov.pl. And here you have a number of choices, what the map should contain. Of course, we have such times, so you have coronavirus, but also you have the local map portals, grids and coordinate systems, landform indexes, but today we are focused mostly on orthophoto map. And when we zoom Krakow area and we take topographic maps out from the choices, we will see again the southern part of the of the city and a map of the area. The integration of the cadastral map is not interesting for us today. So let's zoom in a little bit more. And now you see the central part of the former camp area. And what the map gives us is the possibility to see in much better resolution of the green area that you've seen before, also on ponds that also were shown in the other map. Also, you can see a sort of undefined rubble that is concentrated in the northern part of the former camp. You can also switch here into even better resolution map, even high resolution map, and here you see more precisely the rubble that I was saying about earlier. What's the thing with the rubble? That's the first question. Of course, as I said before, the camp was used as a recreation area, but it doesn't explain the existence of the rubble. In the introduction, I've mentioned that Nazis decided to locate the camp on the place where two cemeteries existed. The cemetery of remnants of which are still visible, the old cemetery that belonged to the Jewish community in Podgórze, and also the new cemetery of the Jewish community in Krakow. So the Jewish community in Krakow, when they decided to locate the cemetery here, they also decided to build a preburial hall. This kind of halls were quite often built in bigger cities, towns, or in towns where Jewish communities could afford to build such a hall, such a place where the cemeteries existed. Krakow and Jewish community belonged to maybe not the biggest in Poland, but quite important. They could afford to build such a building, and they built one of the most monumental pre-burial houses in Poland. The building was magnificent, and I will show you how it looked like in a minute. You can also find pictures of this preburial house if you know preburial hall. If you type into Google browser preburial hall Plaszow, you will see three-nave building that was situated here with two small naves on the sides of it and one the main nave right in the middle. The building, as I said, was monumental and it existed till Second World War. Of course, it functioned as a preburial house till 1942. Then it was turned into a place where Nazis kept some animals. Like and then in 1944, they decided to destroy this building. Firstly, they destroyed the naves, and then on site of the burial house, and then they blow up the central nave. Why they did so? The plan was to build here railway tracks and to run the railway line that will lead straight to the camp. And because the railway line, according to the plan, would run through the burial house, it had to be demolished. And they, as I said before, they earlier destroyed the naves on the site of the building, and there was no celebration, there was no event called for this one. But when they decided to blow the central part, they also decided to, or they call some sort of celebration, some sort of event. They call the officials from the town, they call some clerks, some high rank military to show how they destroyed the building. And so this is how the prisoners, those who survived Second World War, remember this day. The story is quite interesting and tragic at the same time, because as some of the prisoners, some of the people, some of the survivors said after Second World War, in this burial hall there were some Torah scrolls hidden. Torah scrolls that survived from one of the synagogues in the city. Those scrolls were kept in Judenrat, so the Jewish, so-called Jewish councils, a Jewish council that was created by Nazis in the office of this council. And then when the ghetto was liquidated, in fact, the members of the Jewish community decided to bring these scrolls with them to the camp. It was hard to hide this kind of items, this kind of artifacts in the camp. So one of the, or some group of the people involved in this action decide to hide it in the burial house. It seems to be perfect. Perfect shelter, perfect place to hide this kind of place, but unfortunately, when Nazis decide to destroy, demolish, raze to the ground, and building, the scrolls were also destroyed and probably burned or were somehow buried under the debris. So this is the story behind this rubble. Here on this picture you have three concentrations of the rubbles that are referring to the three naves that I said before, so that I've mentioned before. So these smaller concentrations that are referring to the small naves on the side of the building, and the biggest concentration right in the middle. Also, you can see the remnant of the cemetery that belonged to Jewish community in Plaszow. But this place, this tool, sorry, also will help us to see things that are not visible from the aerial photos or Google Maps, and that's the LiDAR tool. There are many orthophoto maps available online. The one that I've shown is provided by the state agency, but there are also some maps provided by the city of Krakow. And here on this website, msip.krakow.pl, you have another maps that are quite useful in our presentation, and for those who would like to learn more about history of the city, including history of the Second World War in Krakow. And so, of course, you have a number of choices. You have maps for architects. I realize that the map is in Polish, but the historical map here, mapy historyczne, it's quite similar, so I'm pretty sure that you will find. So let's press the historical map and you will see how useful and how interesting the tool that I'm gonna show you is. So here you have two orthophotos that are joined, and with this tool you can see how the area changed. The one that is in black and white, it's more useful from our point of view because of two things. Because it's black and white, so it's in a way it's hijacking the places that are that are less visible. That's the first thing. And the second, it's from 1970s, so it is showing the place nearly 50 years how it looked like 50 years ago. So again, let's zoom the map, the area that is interesting for us. So here you have map, a modern map, the photo that was taken a couple of years ago. So again, it's pretty similar to what you've seen already. You've seen the square feature of the roll call square. You see the rubble, so the remnants of the burial house. You see the Jewish cemetery, the old Jewish cemetery of the community of Podgórze, and quite distinctive octagonal shape. Here, this map is a little bit better in compared to the orthophoto that I've seen just before, because here you already have the shadows of buildings that used to be here. You have sort of terraces even on these pictures that are quite visible. But let's switch to the 1970s map. And here the picture is completely different. I mean, of course, you don't have a lot of trees, you don't have any overgrown areas like in this one. So here the area looks, as I said, completely different, and the remnants that are barely visible before now are striking to our eyes. So here you don't have you don't have any underlinement of the former roll call square, because as I said, this is quite recent thing and that was sort of organized by the Jewish community in Krakow. But you can in a way show where the roll call square used to be, because it's a place without any features, without any linea, without any shadows of things that used to be here. So yes, that was the roll call square. But again, about near the roll call square, you have a lot of things happening. You have the ponds that I've mentioned before, and ponds that were dug by prisoners, because initially when the camp was built, in fact, Nazis didn't think about any fireproof installations. And in fact, they realized quite quickly how big a mistake it was, because in 1943 a fire broke up in the hospital, in the building of the hospital. Probably it was caused by people, by hospital staff who left the little oven burning in the building. So the fire, unfortunately, started to spread quite rapidly. Fortunately, and the situation was somehow handed by the prisoners. But the danger was that if the Amun-Get and the Nazis would learn that it was some Jewish prisoners who caused this fire, probably a lot of people would die. So fortunately, they convinced Amun-Get it wasn't a human mistake, it wasn't a human error, but they said that it was some sort of electric installation failure, and this caused this fire. So fortunately, no one was killed because of this fire, but the result of the situation was that Nazis decided to build a couple of ponds, a couple of places where they would sort of store water in case of fire. So on this orthophoto and on Google Maps before, those ponds were quite distinctly shown. And here as as well. Here you can see this rectangular things that are quite different from everything that is around. You have the same feature here where my cursor is. And yes, as I said, this was built by prisoners. It was a painstaking job to build these ponds, because now you have to believe me, because it's not visible on the map, but when you come to Krakow, or maybe you've been to Krakow and you've been to the Plaszow, the place where the Plaszow camp was, you know, or you will learn that in fact there is only a thin layer of earth or grass under which is a solid rock. And now you have to imagine digging this kind of ponds in solid rocks with the simple tools without any heavy machinery. So this already caused a death of probably tens of people. So that's the waterproof, sort of waterproof installation built in 1914, 1943. Now you have these octagonal shapes, and another one that I've shown you before, maybe not so distinctly shown, but still visible. So the C hill and the H hill. The proper name of those places are the Chujowa Górka or Chujowa Hill and Cipowy Dołek. Those names are very specific in Polish, because Chujowa Górka, in fact, for people who do not know the history of the area, refers to men's genitals. And the name was given to this place partly because of this name, because of the root name, the men's genitals, and partly because of Albert Hujar, one of the Nazi staff, one of the member of Nazis, who was very active in mass executions that were committed here by Nazis. A lot of survivors said that Albert Hujar was very sadistic and very brutal during these mass executions. And because he was so active, people started to call this place as Chujowa Górka. As the relation to Chujowa Górka, you have Cipowy Dołek, and Cipowy in Polish also is an adjective from women's genitals. Cipowy Dołek relates to the women's sex organs, so it is somehow relates to Chujowa Górka. Why such a names? Probably this is the way how people try to cope with reality, unimaginable for us, reality, a daily life of the Plaszow concentration camp. It was very hard to name a place where every day 100, 200 or 300 people were killed during mass executions. There was no words to describe such a place, so probably the root word would describe it in a way better, or it would relate better to such reality. So this is the orthophoto from 1970s. As I said, it shows a lot of places that are not visible in previous tools or previous maps that I already shown. But let's move back to GeoPortal, because the next tool that I would like to show is probably the best in cases of places like Plaszow concentration camps, so places that were used a couple of years ago, at 20, 70, 100 or 200 years ago, and now they are not so obvious, for people who are visiting. The tool is called LiDAR, so it's the laser scanning tool, and laser scanning a photograph. And in order to get there, here you can, or you have to press the WTS button, and here WMTS. And now you need to follow what I'm doing. So this part of the website is in Polish. So the only thing I can tell you is you need to press this cross on usługi krajowe and cieniowanie. Here you have connect in Polish Poland. And what is important, you have to switch this switcher into this place. This is the visibility of the map. So thanks to this, the map will be much more visible. And what you see here is what really is under the ground. When you get to the Plaszow area, you will see a lot of lumps and bumps, a lot of things that are sticking a little bit out of the ground. You will see some ditches, so it won't be very clear what's there. Thanks to the LiDAR, thanks to this tool, you can see very clearly what's left after the camp under the ground. So here again you can see quite distinctive lineas. You can see the remnants of the barracks here, as I said, the Polish section that functioned till 1944, and then it was when the camp was turned into concentration camp. It was joined to entire camp. And here as well, remnants of another section of the camp, so-called the section where some storages used to be. Terraces that I've mentioned in this place, terraces that during Second World War were also places where barracks were, and barracks were where some manufacturers or some workshops. The octagonal shape that I've mentioned so many times here is clear as nothing else. So again, I repeat it one more, that is the site where there is a mass grave. So the C hill, the H hill as well. The ponds are also very visible. Also the place that were covered with the trees on the previous maps, and that's the industrial area. So during the war, this street, so this thing that runs quite straight through the area was called the Industrial Strasse, so industrial street. So the names gives us some sort of indication what happened here during the war. Here on this photograph, on this LiDAR system, you can see also the H hill and the clue that it was something more, thanks to the system of ditches that runs through the area. Also, you can see quite distinctive feature in the north part of the camp. So this was the place where the preburial house was. So yes, as I said before, the conception that there is no features, there is nothing left after the camp, is not true. As you see, it's quite a lot just under the thin layer of earth. The question is, of course, whether we can explore, whether we can dig this kind of places, and the answer is it depends. Of course, this kind of researches have to be conducted with agreement and with sort of consult from the Jewish community, in this case, Jewish community in Krakow. The archaeological researches that were run a couple of years ago in this part of the camp were run thanks to the agreement from the Jewish community, and it were run here because we generally know that this place wasn't a place where there was some executions or cemeteries before the war. So the possibility of finding some human remains in this part of the former camp was quite low. And the last tool that I would like to show you is the tool that was created at the university, the AGH University of Science and Technology. So that's the university, and the project itself was run by Anna Kuryłowicz, Marzena Koziak, and was supervised by Professor Christian Kozioł. What's the tool? It's pretty much the same or quite similar to the first one that I've shown you, the one that is supervised by the Museum of Krakow. So the aerial picture or the aerial photograph imposed on the Google Maps, and you see more or less where the buildings, where the barracks used to be. This one is a little bit more developed. I mean, here on this website, so kng.agh.edu.pl, you have the short description of the project and also links that will take you to the tool. So the first link will take you to already known and already described by me previously orthophoto, where you have the plan from 1944 imposed. And what you have on this plan, of course, you have buildings that I've already mentioned. You have also the pre-burial house that I've told you about, the one that was destroyed. You have the roll call squares, you have the ponds, everything that I've said. Also on this map, you have those buildings here that I didn't say much about, including the Red House. And the thing with the Red House is that there was no one Red House. In fact, there were at least three Red Houses or Red Villas or Bloody Villas. I've I've seen a lot of names for places where Amon Get used to live. The first place, in fact, was right in the middle of the camp, so more or less here was the first red villa. Why? Why it was called as red villa? Because of two things. First was the color of the house. It was a brick house, so obviously it was a red, but also the prisoners and people who lived in the camp started to call this place as a red because of Amongat himself, because of what he was doing, because of how sadistic he was. So that is why it was called red. The second red house was in the northern part when for a couple of months Amongat moved, and then the third Amongat's villa was on this street, and this was the last one and probably the best known because this was the place that was copied by Steven Spielberg when he filmed Schindler's List. So that was its original place. It's still there, although today it's owned by some private investor. The building itself stood and was used for a lot of years as apartment building. There were some families lived there. Then the families move out. Some private investor in 80s bought this house. He didn't realize what the house was about. He didn't know its history. Then after Schindler's List, after Spielberg's movie, when he realized that he was living, he owned the actual Amongat's villa. He wanted to make some money on it, but he wasn't successful, so still building stood without any renovations. It was for sale for about 20 years. And that's the thing, that after 20 years, another private investor decided to buy. And initially, it was said that he is going to open in the former Amongat's villa some real estate office. It was another sort of factor that brought up discussion on the Plaszow camp and its role and its sort of knowledge about the camp among people from Krakow to the daylight. So Today, it is still owned. The Among's Villa, Commandant's Villa, is still owned by this private investor. You can't see it from inside. You can just see from outside. But as I said, it's still there. So what else you can see, or what you can't see on this map? So you can see buildings that I've described before. So for example, the buildings where people used to work, like workshops or small factories. As you already see, when you click on one of the buildings, you have a short description. So sometimes it's in Polish, sometimes it's in English, like Assembly Square, or here you have on the drawing by Joseph Pau, one of the inmates, Plaszow inmates, a man who survived Second World War, and then after the war he became one of the leading Israeli drawers, and also some people describe him as the father of Israeli animated films. He made his career in this kind of field after the war. So he draw also his memories on the paper, and this is how he remembered the camp and the roll call square. So when you click on those features, you can learn something more. Also, as I said, you can't see some of the things because the map, the plan imposed on the orthophoto is the plan from 1944. So some of the buildings didn't exist, some of the features, some of the places didn't exist, or Nazis planned to build on existing places something else. Like, for example, in this area, you have H. Hill, so one of the mass graves and sites of mass executions, and it's not marked at all. I mean, it's marked with the linear features, but here you have some buildings that Nazis plan to build. So this is how this kind of tool works. It's not ideal. It's not a tool that would eventually everyone should use because, as I said, it doesn't give all the opportunities to discover because this kind of tool probably is um, impossible to develop. But this tool goes with story map. And here, as you see, the story map is also in English. So you can visit the camp using the suggestions of those who designed it. So you have some of course, basic history of the Plaszow camp that goes with citations from those who survived. You have the main places described, like the main camp gate, that is not a gate that many people would imagine. For many people, Plaszow concentration camp or the labor camp before, or any other camp that doesn't fit to the picture of concentration camp is not a proper camp, no matter how brutal it is, no matter how strange it sounds. A Plaszow concentration camp do not fit into a picture of concentration camp. Recent 10, 20 years, unfortunately, cause a lot of simplifying in people's view on this kind of sites. We see it in Krakow, we see it in Auschwitz. Auschwitz became, unfortunately, a tourist attraction, and people who are going there are going to take a selfie in front. I mean, not all, that would be too much to say, but a lot of people are going there to just make a selfie in front of Arbeit macht frei gate. And here in Plaszow camp, there was no Arbeit macht frei gate. There are no any barracks, there are no uh, places like in Auschwitz, and because of that, a lot of people do not find this place interesting or were visiting because, as I said before, it doesn't fit to the general idea of the camp from Second World War. So here on this map, and of course it's not true, and that this kind of tools, the tools that I've shown you today, are showing something completely different. Are showing, and I'm trying to say that it's some completely different story. So back to the tool, back to the model that we are now discussing, and the story map. You have described places that at some point became interesting. It also goes with archive photographs from those places, so it's really, really helpful. Oh, and here you have a picture of already mentioned burial hall, sorry, from interwar period. It's already partly damaged because, as I said, they did it partially. They didn't blow up whole building altogether. I've mentioned about buildings that are still there, and using this tool, I can describe one more place that I just mentioned very briefly before. So the Grey House, and the tool goes a little bit farther in relation to, for example, the map created by the Museum Krakow, because here you have the three-dimensional visualization of at least two buildings. So the Burial Hall and also the Grey House. So let's go to the Grey House. So the Grey House during Second World War was owned by SS. It was a place where they had interrogation rooms, and also the Grey House was a camp prison. So if someone committed a crime in the camp, it could be he or she could be sentenced to spend some time in the cells. And of course, those cells in this prison quite often had only space to stand and stand for 2, 3, or more days. After Second World War, the building was used as an apartment block, but then a couple of years ago, the apartments were moved, and the plan is to build here or to turn this building into the museum that would say history of the camp. What is interesting and worth mentioning is the fact that in the former cells there are still some graffiti remained, graffiti made during Second World War by those who spent some time in there. So as you see, in Plaszow concentration camp, there are still a lot of things to see. Maybe they are not visible at the first glance, but if you'll be there and you'll stand in the middle and look around, having in mind what you've seen today, you will see that there is a lot of traces, of memory. So I strongly recommend to use this tool if you are a teacher, if you are an educator, if you are a tour guide. These kind of tools will help you to discover more about the history of the place, of this place, to learn more about Plaszow concentration camp and history of genocide, history of Shoah in Krakow. I also recommend to follow the websites of Galicia Jewish Museum, of the Museum of Krakow, to follow the websites of people who are somehow involved in bringing this memory back. And there is a couple of institutions of this kind, like, for example, already mentioned, the Galicia Jewish Museum, like the Jewish Culture Festival in Krakow, like Museum in Krakow, a particular person, particular people who are involved, like Professor Jason Francisco, who is a photographer, who is an artist, and whose projects are also bringing this memory back to us.